Hello Internet, and welcome to another episode of Steve Unpacks Games in Portland. We've unpacked a lot of games so far, so let's see what we'll find next.
Is Steve Unpacks in Oregon, not Portland. You can do Portland if you want, it's fine.
Hello Internet, and welcome to another episode of Steve Unpacks Games in Oregon. We've unpacked a lot of games so far, so let's see what we can find in this box. This box is called Box O Games number 8, Core Worlds and War Games. So this might be where my copy of Core Worlds with the Galactic Orders expansion has been hiding. Let's find out. Alright, first up we have the Battletech introductory box set. I don't know if this is still in print, but it was one heck of a deal. You got 20 plastic Battletech miniatures, I think 2 rule books, like a quick start and an introductory, everything you needed to have robots in the 31st millennium rock'em sock'em each other. This game is mostly unchanged, I think, since it was developed in the 80s. And it's a lot of fun. You set up your robots, you take turns, and then you do incredibly detailed actions like figuring out how they kick each other and where individual missiles land on the bodies of the other mechs, and whether they punch through armor and hit the internals and damage components. And yeah, you really just want to set aside an afternoon and kind of drink and play this, and it's like knitting. It's great. Next up, we have this copy of Quartermaster General, which is a game that I picked up at Gen Con and have not played yet. It is a fast-paced World War II strategy game that seemed to me like a sort of Axis and Allies style conquer the world game. There's 6 players between the Axis and the Allies, and it seems like a fairly streamlined game where you build armies and fleets, take over the world, and play card powers from your own national deck. Haven't played it yet because I've been waiting for a good at least 4-player game. In lower player counts, players play multiple nations to keep the balance balanced. So looking forward to playing this with more players and getting it on the table. Alright, next up we have Frontiers, Liberty or Death. This game was on clearance a little while ago. I think for like $8 on a clearance website. It looks like sort of a kind of a budget miniatures war game. There's a whole bunch of punch sheets in here with big fatty cardboard punch outs of units and tanks and mechs. I think there's rulers in here. You're basically playing, kind of, if these were actual miniatures, it'd probably be like hundreds of dollars of minis, but you can get all the fun of that in just this little box. The game system had pretty good reviews, but I believe the system sort of went out of print. The publisher decided to move on to other things. So, looking forward to playing it, and I will see how it plays. Alright, next we have one of my favorite asymmetric 2-player war games. I take back what I said in the previous video about Imperium being one of the only examples I could think of a solid 2-player asymmetric war game. A Few Acres of Snow, which pits the British against the French in the French-Indian War in the northeast of the US/Canada, really fits the bill. You have the British, who are more, I guess, like traditionally expansionist. You sort of have more naval power initially, but you're going to need to go inland into Canada to fight the French, so you're sort of at a disadvantage. The French have Native American guides and trackers and ambushes while the British sort of line up and get knocked off like little tin soldiers. A lot of fun. You're doing both combat and expansion. I believe it sort of has everything you'd kind of want. It's got cards, it's got counters, it's got a map, it's got multiple ways to win. A lot of fun. This is probably one of Tiffany's favorite war games that we've played together that she likes. So, you know, if it gets the vote from both of us, you might also like it. All right, next we have Aeron Armor, the game of battlefield command in the next war, which was developed in '88 by West End Games. Yep, '88. Aeron Armor I picked up a while ago because I was interested in the way that it dealt with limited information in a war game. The designer's notes describe the game as being designed to show how two sides could bluff each other and maneuver around each other. A lot of war games I've played have perfect information. Both players see the units of both sides and can take an equal number of turns and everything. Aeron Armor does two things which I find really interesting. Although, again, some aspects of the game are a little dated because it was from '88. You are fighting, you know, American divisions against Russian regiments, divisions, and armies in a World War III that never happened. The units, the counters, are actually double stacked, and the counter on the top sort of says what unit it is, you know, what its strength factors are. The one on the bottom says how many strength points are in that unit, and they can be from 0 to 9, I think. So as you maneuver around the board, you can see where the enemy is, but not how strong they are. So really what it means is your units need to interact with the enemy units to figure out how strong they are. So you really need to like bluff and hedge, and it sort of takes the edge off a lot of wargame strategy, which is, you know, battle of attrition under perfect information, which is really not that interesting to play. The other interesting thing that it does is it requires players to, or it requires the Soviet player to write out their missions beforehand, and I think on the previous turn, and then they have to stick to those orders, which are vague things. They have to stick to those orders for their units after the other player goes. So you're sort of constrained. You need to plan ahead under these limited information circumstances. So I haven't had a chance to bring this one to the table, but I have read it to death. You know, read all the designer's notes and everything. So would love to bring this to the table. I just need a table big enough for the map. All right, next we have Fighting Formations, Grossland Motorized Infantry Division. Fighting Formations is a World War II tactical war game at platoon and squad scale, which has a more realistic bent than, say, something like Conflict of Heroes, which has more kind of gamey elements, or more abstraction. Fighting Formations is based on one memoir, I forget which, but the battles are sort of, all the scenarios in the book are based off actual battles. It sort of lends a sort of, you know, realistic-ish air to the orders of battle, and you can sort of reenact what those were. The main reason I picked this up was because of its innovative order system. The gist is there is an initiative track that goes between the German and the Soviet players. I should add, you're fighting Eastern Front World War II. I have a number of these games and have sort of compared them all to each other. There's an initiative track with a cube on it that runs from -10 to +10. One side is the Soviets and one side is the Germans. When the cube is on one player's side, they can take actions, which are other cubes that you roll randomly to determine which are available on a track. So they cost from 1 to 10 points. A 1-point action is something like maybe move a unit 1 space, whereas a 9 or 10-point action might be play a powerful card from your hand. On their turn, players can take one of these actions by taking one of the cubes. And then that subtracts that many points from the initiative. And once the initiative swings over to the other player's side, it is on the other player's turn. So in this game, even though you have relatively perfect information about what's on the board, you don't have perfect information about when it's going to be your turn again, what the other player is going to do, what you are going to be able to do, and you can hedge. For example, you might want to take a couple low point actions just to get them out of the way, and then take one big action, which might swing the initiative all the way to the other player. And then you know that they have 10 initiative points to work through before the turn goes to you again. It's a really interesting format. I've only played it solo. It does take probably about twice as long as playing a game of Conflict of Heroes, but it's very interesting and detailed. I would definitely like to break it out again and sort of learn more about how it works. All right, next we have No Retreat, the Russian Front, which is a grand strategic game where you are playing the pretty much up to the entirety of World War II on the Eastern Front between the Germans and the Russians. So starting with Barbarossa and in 1941 and going all the way through 1945 or later for the Grand Campaign, you are sort of playing through all the operational and strategic, or playing through the strategic decisions by both sides. This is the sort of game where it is a little more abstract than some of the huge monster game cousins. It has big hexes. There's not that many counters on the table. I want to say like maybe no more than 30 per side. But you're still really getting the flavor of playing the full conflict. It's the kind of game that has a calendar, so I believe every season there are different events that happen, reinforcements or events elsewhere in the war. So that makes it really interesting to play. The main reason I got it though is for the solo variant. It's been a while since I played it, but in the solo variant, there's a card that flips over, and it determines which side, if they win, means you as the solo player win the game. And there are different conditions in which that card flips over, and I forget what they are. But it sort of tries to keep you honest in a way where you sort of want to play both sides to their best, because the opportunity for victory could happen when the card is saying the opportunity for victory could happen when you're playing either side. So you're sort of playing all the way up until photo finish. It makes the game solo a little bit tighter than sort of traditionally playing a two-player war game solo, where you're just really playing for both sides and trying to have a good time. In this one, you can actually win it as the player, so it's sort of an added incentive to really play your best. Only played this solo once. Would like to break it out and play it again. And lastly, we have the game whose name was on the box. It is Core Worlds with the Galactic Orders expansion. The Galactic Orders expansion came with a larger box than the original, and the insert that was made for this by the Broken Token fits this larger box. Core Worlds on its own was one of the first deck builders I bought, and one of the first that I played. And what attracted me to it was that its gameplay was a little different from sort of the kind of more Dominion or DC deck builder or Ascension style, where you draw the hand of cards from your deck, you play them all, they go into your discard, and then you have no persistence other than what's in your deck and your discard for the next turn. In Core Worlds, you and the other players are splinter factions traveling from the edge of the galaxy all the way to the Core Worlds and trying to conquer them along the way and earn victory points. One of the main things you do in the game is when you acquire cards for your fleet, like normal, you put them in your discard gets shuffled into your deck, but then when you play them from your hand, they go into your war zone, which is sort of a tableau in front of you, and that persists from turn to turn. So you could put a card down on your war zone on turn 1, and then maybe on turn 5 is when you actually use it. And then to conquer planets in the center of the board, I believe players take turns taking actions until everybody's done. You use the cards in your war zone to then conquer planets in the center, and then add them to your tableau, and then you can use their energy production or powers further in the game. So you can, there's really a nice sense of progression in terms of building up, adding things to your war zone, using them, they get discarded, cycling them through back into your deck and your hand and into your war zone again. The other thing I like progression-wise about the game is there are actually, instead of one large deck that the cards in the center are drawn from, there are actually 5 separate decks. And every 2 turns you start drawing from a new deck. So the cards in the first deck are sort of weaker and cheaper, and the cards all the way at the very end are actually just for victory points. So sort of there's a really nice narrative flow to the game that I like, and also a definite end. So that's the base game. The Galactic Orders expansion added a number of things which make it really a lot more fun in 2-player. I thought the original Core Worlds was a little weak in 2-player, and playing it with the changes they've made, it really is a lot more fun in 2-player. Chiefly among those, there's a faction affinity on all the cards that you play, and I believe when you deploy cards of a specific faction, you get favor towards that faction, and then you can cash those favor points for that faction in on abilities that let you break the rules of the game. So you sort of have, there's a little bit more flexibility and unpredictability in a 2-player game, as well as the sort of race to have affinity to specific factions. Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to playing this more 2-player. I'm really happy I got the expansion for this. And also having an organizer for a deck builder really makes it a lot easier to bust out and play, way less baggies. Final thoughts, I would say, since I used to do a lot more of my gaming solo, I have a lot of games which I've only played a couple times, and some of them I really quite like that I would like to bring to the table more. I'm especially reminded that I really like playing A Few Acres of Snow. And I'd actually forgotten about the similarities to Imperium, so maybe sometime I will do a head-to-head. I will play both A Few Acres of Snow and Imperium and give the final lowdown. And with that said, this was the last box of my games, so Internet, I will see you maybe in a future series.